a mountain or on the edge of a cliff, and you lay this wing out behind you, and you got strings attached. You pull on the strings, and your wing catches some wind, and then it goes up above you, and you take a look at it, and everything looks good. Then you run off the cliff, and it takes you away, and you fly. It's an unbelievable feeling. The goal is to catch a thermal, and a thermal is rising air. You can catch thermals, and you can go up thousands of feet, and you can just hang out and freeze a bird. It's certainly it's an exciting sport, and it lets me anyway forget about everything else except what I'm doing right there, which is why I love it. Now, there's a couple problems with it. One of the biggest problems is if you get to the site, so you spend, I don't know, I live in a great place for paragliding, but you can spend an hour or so getting to the site, getting ready to fly, and then the wind goes in the wrong direction, or it's too strong. And it's really frustrating to have to walk back down instead of flying down. So this advice that I got, I was quite frustrated one day. I was standing there. I was the next guy in line. There were some people behind me waiting, and the weather was not cooperating. I'd get my kite up, and the wind would whip it around and drop it down behind me. And I really felt the pressure to go. But a pilot came up to me, and he said this. He said, "It's better to be on the ground wishing you were in the air than in the air wishing you were on the ground." And that saying stuck with me. I'll say it again. It's better to be on the ground wishing you were in the air than in the air wishing you were on the ground. So I didn't launch that day. It was just too risky. But I have found myself in the air wishing I was on the ground many times in my life, both literally and figuratively. And most of these flights were avoidable. So every time I get about to start a business or invest in a business or stocks, I think about the saying. I especially think about it when I find myself in difficult situations. So I'll just tell a few stories. The first time I was actually in the air wishing I was on the ground was when I was training to be a paraglider. Now, my business partner was with me, and we were both kind of competitive. So we started competing right away. Who could stay up the longest? Who could catch the best thermals? Who could land closest to the target? They always had a dot on the ground, and we would always try to land on it. And I think we were on our 8th flight. He went first. We could land by ourselves. So the instructor took us up there, and he launches my partner off, and he gets 1,000 feet up and then heads towards the landing zone, which is about 1 kilometer away. And then I go, and I get up about 1,000 feet again. And these were quick flights, so we could practice launching and landing. And my partner comes over the radio and says, "I just crashed. Both my legs are broken." And I couldn't ask why. What they used to do is they would just duct tape the radio to my helmet. And so I couldn't push a button. I couldn't say, "Why did you crash? What's going on? Are the winds bad?" I was terrified. That was the worst 10-minute flight I had. I wanted to be on the ground. I did not wish to be in the air. Luckily, well, not for him, but for me, he was trying to land on the dot, and he slowed himself too much, and the wing collapsed, and he fell from the sky and broke his legs, but I landed fine. So, he never got back in the air again. And I don't blame him. He had his legs hurt. Now he's got plates in his legs, and he was in a wheelchair for a long time. But I do feel bad for him because he never got to experience the joy of flying like I did. But I was hooked. I tried it. I loved it. I continued my lessons, and I weighed the risks and the reward. And I've been flying for many years now. The same kind of thing happened to me on my first, well, maybe not exactly the same, on my first business venture. So most of what I've done was tech, but not the first one. My first real attempt when I was 22. I was actually taking a break from school. Found myself teaching English in Japan. And I lived there for about 3 years, actually. And while I was teaching, many of the students and others expressed an interest in going to Canada. And in hindsight, I think they were just being nice to me. But I thought, what the heck, let's start a company and bring Japanese tourists to Canada. So I started a company called Anne Travel. Now, Anne being my mom's name, and Anne of Green Gables was very popular in Japan. And so I advertised over there with some help from some friends. And, a few months later, I was back at home and I had my first tour. Now, when I was talking with my friends and they told me the first tour is coming, they first said, hey, there's a group of ladies coming. And I was 22, thought, this is awesome. This is going to be great. About 30 ladies coming. Unfortunately, the group turned out to be people from the Seroptimus Club. I don't know if anyone knows that, but the average age was about 70. And so I tried real hard to have fun with them, and I did have some fun with them, but it was difficult. I couldn't find the right food for them. There were constant complaints. I found myself wishing I was on the ground. It was not fun. When I finally waved goodbye to them in the bus, I called my buddy and said, stop advertising. It wasn't right for me. I did not want to do this. So, but I had tried entrepreneurship, and I wasn't going to let that negative experience ruin my chances of having a career in entrepreneurship. So I decided to go back to school. And that's, I went back to school, got my business degree. I wish I could say that my business degree saved me from making mistakes. Maybe it did. Maybe it did save me from making some mistakes, but it definitely didn't save me from making all the mistakes. So that'll kind of be the theme for today. How to make sure we don't get in the air and wish we were on the ground. Because it pains me to see out of business signs. And they say over 70% of businesses fail. I know what that represents. Frustration, headache, loss of confidence, loss of money. Sometimes marriage, friendships, family relationships fail. Anyway, over the years, the 28 years or so that I've been doing this, I've learned a few things about removing risk. And I hope to share some ideas about that with you today. So just to start, what is entrepreneurship like? Well, big surprise here. It's exactly like paragliding. Some days are spectacular. It's the best thing you'll ever do. And some days it is not good at all. After we were flying, we'd often sit around at the landing zone and talk with other pilots. And I heard the best story ever. And it was from a guy. It was about a time, this was a few years later, but it was about a time when he was finishing his training. In order to be able to fly, you have to train and do 30 flights. So he was around his 30th flight. And he launched. And again, he had the one-way radio duct taped to his head. And the instructor was able to get him some thermals. And he said he went about 7,000 feet up. And which was great. Everyone on the ground was cheering for him. Like, that's the best thing you can do. That's what you want. They were all wishing they were in the air. Unfortunately, the winds were a bit rough and he was terrified. And it lasted way too long. He said that he was clenching and he was just absolutely hated it. He ended up cramping. He got sick. He was throwing up and worse. I won't get into it here, but it was worse than just throwing up. When he finally landed, he said he laid there and cried, swearing he would never do that again. It was a miracle that he got back in the air and actually became a very good pilot. So why do I share this story? Actually, it's to give you hope. He should have been told a couple things. First, he was never told what to expect. He thought he was falling. I remember the first time I hit an air pocket at 7,000 feet. That'll wake you up. I would have hated to think that I was going to crash. So someone should have warned him. The second thing he should have been told is that it gets better. So I'm very confident that years later, that same flight wouldn't scare him at all. You know, you get used to the bumps, you trust your equipment, and that lets you relax and enjoy the flight. So over the years, I've had many people say how lucky I am that I'm an entrepreneur. From their perspective, easy sailing. They had no idea I was covering payroll with my personal line of credit, or I just lost my biggest customer. They didn't know I couldn't sleep because I was so worried, or I was working 18-hour days and making no money. Maybe an employee was quitting because I couldn't pay them what they were worth. Anyway, after the years of riding the roller coaster, you get used to it. You know that you can get through the bumps, and you get skills and knowledge that lets you relax, and your confidence builds. You also learn when not to fly and how to enjoy a bit of a rougher ride. Just to hit that home, I recently invested in a company, and a couple months later, I met with the owner and was talking with her, and she was stressed. I could see it. I could recognize it. She was wishing she was not in the air. So I said to her, what are your two biggest problems right now? And she told me, and I was like, wow. I said, after this discussion, I want you to email me that information, and then don't think about those problems. Those are now my problems. They weren't that big for me. They weren't trivial problems. I ended up having a couple of uncomfortable conversations to remove those problems. But for me, it was normal. It wasn't that hard. For her, I could see the weight lift as soon as I said, give me those problems. They're not your problems anymore, they're mine. Tears, actually. She didn't cry, but I could see the wetness in her eyes. It gets easier, is what I'm saying. So when I get asked for advice on entrepreneurship, the first thing I say is entrepreneurship is not for everybody. If you're terrified of heights, or you're not somewhat physically fit, I would suggest you don't take up paragliding. If the goal is to reduce risk, what can you do to make sure you start on the right foot? What type of person do you need to be? So I've seen many businesses fail, in fact, some of my own. I've lost partners for many reasons. I have 5 items that I want to talk about with this topic. But we thought this would be a great time to do a quick breakout. And in smaller groups, you can discuss what you feel are important attributes. What will give you an advantage when starting a business? So Megan, I'm not sure how to go about doing that, but if you can deal with that, that'd be great.
Wonderful. So what I'll do is I will add the question that you posed. What will give you an advantage, you said? What will give you an advantage?
Sure.
In business, and then what we'll do is we will break everyone out into a breakout session. So you'll be in smaller rooms, and if we could just have somebody volunteer off the bat to kind of get the conversation going, that would be appreciated. Dean, we'll keep you in the main room for now, and then also Ross, and then we can choose where we're going to jump you. So on 3, 2, 1, Jen, let's get this party started, shall we? Wonderful.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Hope your discussions were fruitful.
Yeah, it was nice. I'm happy to share a few notes from my team. That was the team number 3. So those are the points that we got. You got to be able to be flexible. You got to be able to be persistent. You need to change and change fast. You need to have, you need to be creative and problem solver. Those are the points that we got from our discussion.
Thank you for sharing. That's great.
We'll turn it over to you, Dean. If you want to invite some of the other people to share, that'd be great. I'll go from there.
Okay, yeah, does anyone else want to share then? If not, I'll jump in. Oh, go ahead.
I'll share a few that came up in the context of our conversation. Resilience, openness, and an orientation to continuously learning, not being closed-minded, Strong action orientation, so that one does not engage in analysis paralysis. There's a time and place for analysis, but then you need to act. A willingness to make sacrifices and put yourself out there. Those are some of the other attributes that were identified in our discussion.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Well, I'll go through my 5. and you know, there's way more than 5. These are the ones that I have experience with. So the first one is personal finances. They play a huge role in your business success right away. At least mine didn't. And I was terrible at forecasting. My first company with employees, I started when I was 25. It was a dial-up internet provider back in the dial-up days, so the 1995. It took a few years to get to a livable income. And every time we broke even, I had to add more modems. So even after we broke even, I was reinvesting everything back to the company. And a couple years later, in 2000, we sold it for what I thought was millions of dollars, but I sold it for shares. And there's a trading freeze on those shares. And for those that remember, 2000, there was a stock market crash and all the tech companies went way down. And the one that I sold to, my shares went down to 0. So there I was, 30 years old, 2000, I had to start over. I started another company, which took me a couple of years before I could break even. So I went a long time without a bunch of money. So I needed to be able to survive for a while without income. And I've lost partners over the years because they couldn't survive without a paycheck. Their student loans, mortgage, car payments, credit card bills, they were just too much. It was very frustrating for me because I had to change my plans. I'd have a partner, they would be part of my plan. But perhaps even more frustrating for some of my partners because they couldn't participate in the companies that we later sold. So many great ideas go nowhere because of personal finances. Like, how can you start a business when you have a lot of personal expenses? So if you want to start a business, it'll be less risky if your spending habits are minimal. Now, you can't wait till everything's perfect. A savings would be nice, but as long as you know there may be lean times, hopefully not the 8 years that it took me, you can find alternate ways to finance. And I've got to talk a topic about that a little bit later if we get to it. So I've had a lot of people approach me also with great ideas. I always ask them what their personal burn rate is. So how much are you spending a month and what do you need? And I have yet to finance a large burn rate. So having no savings and a high burn rate increases the risk. That's number one. The next one is debt. Now, I think you have to have an aversion to debt. I avoid debt as much as possible. It saved me many times over the years, and could be from the way I was raised. I was living with wildly fluctuating income for many years, and really common sense tells me that interest is a business killer. So debt, I actually think, is okay if you have a plan, and that plan should show how your money will eventually bring in more than what the debt was. Later on, actually, the company I started after my ISP, actually 2 after this, we sold services to lenders, so banks. And I was talking to one of my tier 2 customers, and the tier 2 customer is a bank. Actually, it's not a bank, it's a tier underneath a bank. So if you can't get a loan from a bank, you can go to a tier 2 finance company. Avco, Household Finance, Easy Financial, those are the types. Some of those have been bought up now. But anyway, I was talking about their typical customer. I was really surprised to hear that lawyers and financial advisors are some of their largest customers. And what they're doing is they're getting high interest vehicle loans. They want to look professional, and the bank won't give them a loan. And they're going and paying 18, 20% for a car. Now, I get that. I drove a Nissan Micra, and I would park 2 blocks away from any meetings that I had to get to. So I understand wanting to look good, but interest for ego is not that smart, I don't think. Too many of my businesses didn't go as planned or had slow times. Interest would have killed me, and it would have killed me personally. So, for example, we never bought fancy furniture. In fact, we bought a law firm's furniture when they upgraded. And we used that for years. I guess I was kind of lucky. Most of my clients were Toronto, Calgary, California, Vancouver, and we would travel to see them, and they would only send their auditors to see us. So we never really met with the big wigs in our office. So interest is bad, but I have to say I'm a little bit of a hypocrite here because I have a lending company, a small lending company that I have on the side, and I love interest. Interest never stops. I try to teach my kids that passive income is the way to go. So one time they were talking about their part-time jobs and how much they were making. And I cut in trying to teach and said, look, I'm making more. The difference is I make it whether I'm sitting here talking to you guys, watching a movie, sleeping, or on holidays. And I do that with an hour a month of work. And so, just trying to teach them that. But can you imagine being on the opposite side and paying $20 an hour even while you sleep? So try to stay on the right side of interest. That's debt. My mouth is getting dry. All right, the next one, family support. Think very carefully if you decide to go into business without the support of your family. It would be extremely difficult to come home after a hard, stressful day to have your significant other say, I told you so, or why don't you go get a real job? I lost partners to this. Their spouse was either impatient or stopped believing in them. I actually have friends who gave up their business for their spouse and then because of resentment lost their spouse as well. So I got really lucky on this one. My wife and I agreed on my career path early in marriage, and she supported me the whole way through. I had a great summer job through university. I applied at a mill. They saw that I spoke Japanese. They sent my resume up to head office, and I translated for the Japanese and sold Japanese lumber and plywood to the Japanese market. They offered me a job after I graduated. But I remember sitting down with my wife to explain why I wanted to go out on my own. I told her my plan. Plans are important to me. And we decided to do that. My in-laws weren't super excited, but we went ahead with it. And she never complained about the hours I worked or having no money. And we were mostly successful reducing our spending to match our low income. I remember one time coming home after a difficult day to my wife and 2 daughters, and my wife had made a meal that I found unappealing. It seemed to me like we had this type of meal too often, and I complained about it. She, while unsuccessfully trying to hold back tears, told me that we just didn't have any money. She was trying to hold it from me so I wouldn't feel the stress. That was over 20 years ago. I still remember how low I felt, not one of my best moments. Without that support, I would never have been able to ride out the rough times. It's one of the stories I tell people when they say, how can you be married for so long? I have a few of them. So you need family support. And they have a plan and have them buy into that. I just thought I'd mention one more thing here. One day your business will be done. And for me, it was the 1st of December, 2018. I went from getting 200 emails a day to 6. I counted them the next day. There's only 6. I went from no time to lots of time. Business can't be your only focus. I was grateful to have a family that would welcome me home. I still had a few good friends, but you can really get focused on your business and forget about what the big picture is. Is it about money, freedom, relationships? Sometimes we may focus on the money part too much. Anyway, the next one, work ethic. I think for me, it was my ability to work. My dad was a firefighter, but he had a hobby farm, chicken, cattle, turkeys. I often resented the hours I spent working and not playing with my friends. He'd give me an assignment and I couldn't leave till it was done and done right. He taught me to work hard. Just one small example, I always complain about this, but my dad made a deal with a farmer 3 kilometers up the road that he could milk the cow every second morning to get milk. Well, my dad was a shift worker. So when he couldn't get there in time, that's when I found myself riding a 10-speed bike with a big 5-gallon bucket before school going to milk that stinking cow. And, I learned how to do it fast. I got some benefit from that. And I graduated high school. I went tree planting and made a bunch of money because I could work. And full circle, now I have a small hobby farm that my kids hate. So you need to be a hard worker. Running your own business is not a path to take if you want to slack off, which kind of ties into the last one, self-motivated. You need to be self-motivated. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder, and it's made worse when my core gets weak. So I tried to go to the gym, and I just can't do it. So a gym that has classes and a coach that pushes me. And I've been going to that gym for the past 9 years, and it's expensive. It's not what I wanted, but I know my limitations. I couldn't do it without that. When it comes to business, I'm the opposite. I'm a self-starter, and I'll do what it takes. So if you need someone to tell you what to do at work, then get a job. Business isn't for you. If you can't say every Tuesday morning, I'm going to call 5 potential customers and get it done, then maybe business would be difficult. And I've seen businesses fail because people aren't motivated and don't have the work ethic to get the job done. So those are the 5 topics. I'm just looking at the time, and I'm going to just jump ahead a few things here because there were some questions that came out that I think people want the answer to, and I'm going to see if I can to get to that. With still maybe a few minutes for questions if there are any at the end. So jumping back to paragliding. Once you're ready to fly and you're getting set, there's a number of things you have to check. Is your radio working? Is your helmet strapped on? Are your lines clear? Is the harnesses buckled? Your reserves attached? Have you checked the weather? What is the forecast saying? Is the wind coming from the wrong direction? So just like a flight check, a business plan is a safety check for business. Every business needs one. It forces you to review many factors that are important before you invest too much time, effort, and money. Now, hopefully you'll find some dangers. They'll pop out of the business plan. I'll spend the rest of this time going over some factors that I think you should think about in your business plan. I'm not going to show you how to make a business plan, just highlight some things to consider. Unless there's any questions right now. Okay. So first, the idea. I want to talk about the idea first because it's the first thing, not because I think it's the most important. So business is pretty simple. We live in a mostly free market society here in Canada, and the rules are really straightforward. You have to provide a product or service. And in order to have a business, someone has to pay you for that. And you can't force them to pay you, so they have to want to pay you. And so the product has to benefit them more than what they're willing to pay. And if you want to stay in business, you have to generate that service for less than what they're willing to pay. And that gap is the profit. So I hope that made sense. But, some people just don't get this. I know an artist, and he loves to paint, and he's super talented, but he'll only paint what he wants to paint, whatever moves him, not what people want. He doesn't make much money and complains about it. And over the years, I've had a difficult time listening to this artist complain. I know they can make a lot of money. In fact, I even offered to help. If you just paint what people want. Instead, he turns to government programs to keep the money flowing. So a business, you can't get away with that. So how do you find ideas? Well, I always look for gaps. When I hear things like, I hate waiting for this, or why do you have to do that? I see these as opportunities. One of my most successful businesses was based on a complaint. And it was about a process that took 3 days and cost $30. We saw an opportunity to use technology to reduce the time and cost. We were able to reduce that time from 3 days to 30 seconds. And we ended up charging $10. The automation on top of that removed any human error, so it made it easy to sell. Eventually, we were able to complete thousands of these transactions even before we got to work in the morning. The computers would download it from all our customers throughout the night, and then the computers would process these transactions before we even got to work. And eventually, we were able to sell that company for millions. So how do you know if your idea is a good one? I'll tell you what I did. I'd ask my wife, and they were all good ideas, and I could do them. She was my cheerleader. I never stopped there, luckily. Next thing I do is ask my dad, where I got some real feedback, and some of my ideas were dumb. It's reminding me of Shark Tank. You know, so many dreams are being crushed after they spent thousands of dollars. American Idol is very similar. Simon crushes people that should have been told that they couldn't sing, that they can't sing. So are you sure your idea is good and not just to you? Are you like the artist? Do you feel everyone should like it? The question is, what solution are you bringing to the market? What void is this filling? And there should be a compelling answer. The first paragraph in your business plan could be exactly that. Why are you starting it? The answer, by the way, is not to make money, and the answer is not about you. It's about filling a need. So if someone comes to me for money and they want to start a coffee shop because they really like coffee, I don't care what they like. Show me the need. The next thing you want to do is think of your target market. Do you understand the target? What are the demographics of your market? Do they have money? 20-year-old students don't have a lot of money. Are you sure you want to be marketing to that demographic? And how do you approach this market? My son in grade 12, and one of his friends is trying to start a company that sells t-shirts. And I love that. I sit back and I try not to stick my fingers in it. So I sometimes just ask him a couple questions like, why would someone buy from you when there are thousands of options out there? What can make you stand out? Anyway, with your idea, make sure you vet it. Ask yourself these questions and run it by people that aren't your cheerleaders. The next topic I wanted to touch on is timing. And many say this is most important. I actually agree. Sometimes looking back, it's hard to know why some of my ideas, some of my businesses failed. And I don't think it was always my fault. Both positive and negative, by the way. You can't take credit when things go good and blame everyone else when things go bad. By the way, that's the wrong type of business wrong type of person to go into business with as a partner. Anyway, I think a lot of it was due to timing. An easy example, I had a dial-up internet. That wouldn't work right now. That would be bad timing if I started a dial-up internet provider right now. At the time, I knew it was good because during university, I started a tech company and we were building computers, networking offices, and everyone started asking us about the internet and how to get on the internet. So we knew it was a good idea, but it was a small window. So tech companies are especially susceptible to timing. If it's too early, you're educating the market. It takes too much money to convince people. If you're too late, someone else is offering a good product at a good price and it's hard to break in. Timing also is difficult. It's difficult to know when to exit. I already shared my badly timed exit. It's like trying to time the stock market. No one can do it. I've seen people promise me the world and it never works. So even though it's difficult to really nail down, timing is important and you should think about it before you start your business. Now I moved the next one up because I saw some questions about it, and this is financing. So when you're writing your business plan, you got to figure out how you're going to finance it. And there's lots of ways to finance. I've actually been involved in almost all of them. And I'm not a fan of any of them, but I understand it's required. So I'll go through my thoughts on it. First, before you get financing, you got to understand why you need it. And you got to be very specific. You need a plan showing how you'll use these funds and what you expect in return. And then you got to decide what you're giving up. Are you going to give up shares? Or are you just going to pay interest? Or in the first option, you might get lucky because the first option, the easiest, is friends and family. Sometimes friends and family won't charge interest, but not mine. I borrowed from my dad when I had the ISP, the dial-up internet service provider. And I had to buy a server. Servers don't cost us much anymore, but it was a $30,000 server. I had to account to my dad for a long time for that until he was paid back, and it caused a lot of tension. And until we paid it back, it was stressful, but it wasn't bad. And he did charge interest. I've also loaned money out to family and friends for their startups, and some of these were over 15 years ago, and I'm still waiting for payments, which is also relationships. It's really hard to watch people buy things. They'll say, hey, look what we just bought. Well, you owe me money. You shouldn't really be buying that. Okay, the next best thing maybe is a bank loan. That way you're just paying interest. The problem with a bank is they're always going to secure it to something that you own, and they're going to take it if you don't pay them back. And the rates will go up if your security isn't great. What I always say about the banks is they're a good place to go for money when you don't need it. Maybe secure a line of credit on your house. That's what I did. That's cheap interest, and you can use that money for your business. Now, one thing I don't like about banks, if you have partners and you want to get a loan at a bank, they always have this thing called joint and several, which means the bank has the right to go after any one of you, not all of you. So if you borrow $100,000 and one of you happens to be rich and the other partner is poor, the risk is not the same. They will go after the person that has money. Angel investing is next. It's a little more difficult to acquire because it takes a bunch of due diligence. So you got to have everything in place. They'll take a piece of your company, but sometimes you'll have someone you can talk to. The hard part about it was the one experience I have. I got $150,000 once for one of my companies, and it was great. We did what we said we would do. The problem was 2 years later, when we sold the company, I cut a check for $1.5 million to this guy. And that was difficult. I kept thinking, I bet I could have done it without borrowing that taking that $150,000. I would never go back on a deal, but that's what I thought. I thought I probably could have done it without that. He wanted, by the way, to invest in everything else that we ever did. Of course. The last thing I would say is, and something I've done over the years, is sometimes employees want to get shares. And oftentimes you're raising money to get employees. And so what you might want to do is offer some kind of share wage split. I wouldn't suggest just paying salary or just paying them with shares, because they're going to need to get some money and they'll find another job and they'll put half time into your business. The real negative to that is if they end up leaving and they have shares in your company, then it's a bit messy to deal with, but legally you can work with that. So my recommendation is actually to avoid it as much as possible. Grow a bit slower. That's just my opinion. That's what has worked for me in the past. So I'm going to skip the rest of this, and I'm just going to conclude here, I guess, and just say that I'm glad I didn't stop paragliding after my partner's crash. I'm also glad my business crashes didn't stop me from trying again. It wasn't always smooth sailing, and there were definitely times I wished I was on the ground instead of in the air. It's actually been kind of interesting for me to reminisce about some of my business experiences over the past 30 years or so. So anyway, I hope I've said something today that will help some of you have a safe flight.
Dean, I think we do have some questions. I know there were some in the chat, and we've got a question by Azad. Is that correct? Azad, if you'd like to go.
Yes, you can. It's my last name, but that's not my actually familiar name. So yeah, let's keep it simple. You can call me Sam as well.
Thank you. Go ahead with your question there.
So you mentioned about the the incorporation, the share structure, and the people, those who are interested, to get partners on board, and how to deal with that legally in future if they leave. How about, like, to start with, if someone start just a sole proprietorship, or like just in a low profile in a way, and then to some point if they decide to go for incorporation, do you think this is a good idea, or from the very beginning someone should start with an incorporation? What would be your advice?
You know, for me, it comes down to expenses. So if you're going to incorporate, then you're going to do taxes. And I think most lawyers now are charging about $1,500 a year for taxes on a corporation. I think you can get it cheaper if you do have a sole proprietorship. I have started a few sole proprietorships years ago, but everything I do is incorporated now. I think eventually you're going to want to incorporate, especially if the business is going to get big and you have employees and things like that. You definitely want to incorporate, but sole proprietorship is totally fine for a small business.
Thank you.
I know that we had another question from Barb, and that was, can we connect with others after the call? And by all means, for those of you alumni that are here today that would like to make connections, you can use the private chat to do that. Or if you are looking for connections from us, I know that Dean we can share some of this information out as well. The recording for those of you who are here can be shared if you're interested. Just let us know. But please do make those connections via chat. Any other questions that you'd like to pose? I know Annette had one that was in here, and that was, can you share resources to help build a business plan? And Sham, who just spoke, actually was the one who shared a link to Annette there. If anyone else, or Dean, if you've got thoughts on that, please feel free to go ahead with that.
There's lots of resources out there.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't have one in particular. I'm writing about that right now. So I have looked around for lots. It depends on what you want to do. If it's just for yourself, it doesn't have to be formal at all. If you're going for money though, it has to be pretty formal. So figure out what you want. And there's lots of resources out there.
Wonderful. Annette has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, one suggestion my friend who's a business owner suggested in terms of reaching out to people in the sort of similar industry that you want to build your business in. But I guess I'm a little bit timid because I'm just worried, like, what's been your experience reaching out to those people? Because I guess I have the worry that they're going to think that I'm taking their business idea or whatever. So yeah, just want to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it used to be that anytime I talked to anybody, I'd have a non-disclosure agreement, and I would bring it out, and we'd all sign it and make sure no one could steal anyone's idea. I don't do that anymore. In fact, I don't even sign non-disclosures anymore. So just because you can get yourself in trouble, and everyone's doing something that might overlap someone else. That's a tough one. If you've got a really good idea that no one's thinking about, then I would try to keep that to yourself, or talk to someone that's trusted, maybe get a consultant. They will definitely sign a non-disclosure agreement. But yeah, just try to get the right people that you can trust, because yeah, it's possible. Someone can steal your idea. I've never had it happen.
And Dean, there's a couple more questions for you in the chat. One from Iago that says, what are you investing in now, and which startup ideas do you think are hot at the moment?
So I have some people out there that are bringing me different businesses. Because I understand business, I like to deal with businesses myself. I have an advisor that takes care of my stock market and bonds and all that stuff. I don't do that. I used to do that. 2008, I took a bit of a beating and decided I'm not cut out for that. So I hire someone out to do that. But if it's a business that I understand and I can help out a bit, that's what I'm looking for right now.
Another question here was, let me just make from Rob, how do you encourage entrepreneurship within your business as an entrepreneurial approach?
Yeah, You know what? I guess for me, I always like to give employees some shares. That made them feel like they would benefit if the company did well, and that seemed to do it for me. I don't really know how to get someone to act like an entrepreneur, and you really can't expect it from an employee. They don't understand mostly. You're risking everything. You've got everything on the line. Your house, your family's life is on the line, and they're working for a paycheck. It's just a total different mentality, and you really can't expect them to have the same concern for your company as you do. So I use shares.
Wonderful idea. Question here from Ken. And please share what it's like to hire your first employee, given no one knows your business and it's just a vision in your head at that moment. So advice on that. Great question, Ken.
Yeah, that's a section I didn't hit. I had a lot of experience with employees over the years. I never had a huge company. The biggest one was probably 22 employees, which is big enough. That's a big headache. Hiring your first employee, I guess what you want to do is just really make sure that you know what you need and try to find someone with that skill. As an entrepreneur, you don't have all the skills. No one does, and you need help. I always found it difficult when you're starting to have the money to pay them. So if you've got that part figured out, you're great. Just hire the person with the best skills. I never played the minimum wage game. You really want to get someone that's decent. So you're going to attract the right person if you're paying the right amount of money.
Wonderful.
Hope that helps.
And Sham, again, thank you. And it looks like you've got your picture there. It says you're from Self-Employment Training for Young Entrepreneurs. That's exciting that you're here today. And he's invited you to connect on LinkedIn, Dean. So there's a link there to Asham. There you are, Asham.
Thank you. No, it's sometimes the bandwidth is a challenge, so I just want to stay on the less interruption. Yes, thank you so much. Look, it's then really appreciate, like it's a blessings to have the real entrepreneurs share their stories, and it's every case is different, every entrepreneurship experience is different, but we learn from the mentors, we learn from the experienced entrepreneurs. So really appreciate your time and sharing for those beautiful stories, exciting stories, actually, I'd rather say.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
We want to thank you, Dean. Honestly, you've given us, those of us who didn't even know we wanted to be entrepreneurs, something to think about today. And certainly I'm sure those of you who've been mulling about and sitting on the sidelines thinking, when am I going to take the leap off this cliff, as he's described in paragliding? It can seem all too daunting. And one quote came to mind today that I was thinking of, and then as you actually spoke, Dean, it became even more vibrant, and that is, someone once said, entrepreneurship is living a few years of your life like most people won't, so that you can spend the rest of your life living like most people can't. And so I think, if you put that in your sights, those of you who are still here with us, it is a challenge. And certainly you've painted a very authentic picture, maybe even more daunting, I think, for those that might have been thinking, this isn't so bad, I can do it. It's the real tax. It's not going to be easy. And I think anything that's a challenge is also worth it. So thank you for your honesty and for being here to share that with us today, Dean. And I'd invite those of you who are still with us, please feel free to unmute and share your thoughts to Dean before we sign off. But again, thank you for joining us, Dean.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Wendy, are you there? You're going to say something. Go ahead. Oh, good. Welcome. And everyone, we'll be joining you again. We'll have another Alumni Chat Series coming. So please keep in touch with us. And if you've got someone you'd like to share, or you've got something you'd like to share, we'd love to be able to use this platform as an opportunity for you to do that. And we thank you for being with us today. Have a great day. Happy Wednesday.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Dean.